Good morning, everyone. This is about LINX's preparations for something that is now looking, at this stage, like it might be quite unlikely, namely Brexit occurring without a deal with the EU. This is not a political or public affairs presentation. This is a commercial one. So, what's the issue? Essentially, in the event, after Brexit, the UK will continue to apply GDPR. That's already been implemented in UK law. So, and in the event of there being a deal between the UK and the EU, we expect that to be recognised by the EU and everything will carry on as normal. In the event of a no deal, even though the UK will continue to implement the GDPR, the EU is unlikely to recognise that we are so doing.
Why are they unlikely?
Because it's not GDPR, it's the UK's law, which, as far as they're concerned, is not European law.
That's an assumption on your part.
That is the advice from the Information Commissioner's Office. So essentially, the EU.
Where do they get their view from?
Okay. From the standard practice of the EU. Sorry.
It's really important because you start building up a lot of assumptions and then everybody starts on the line. Sorry, it's really important because this sort of. So I run the kind of EU program in BT. Actually, we have a different view from that. We have a view that much of the data exchange that we do today actually will be able to carry on without any.
Okay, Neil, if you wait a second, I'll explain how this is going to occur.
Okay.
And it is the same view, yes, but it requires some preparations in advance.
Yeah, okay, and that's the point. I just think it's really, we kind of start with this kind of hugely negative thing, when actually what we're worried about it, and actually just get to the facts, because it's frustrating as hell when you see a lot of stuff that actually, when you dig into it, isn't quite as ugly as it looks.
Exactly. So if you allow me to get through, I will show you how it is made not ugly.
Brilliant. Stay positive, Malcolm.
Thank you, Neil. Okay, so the EU does essentially use the GDPR as a bit of a barrier to trade, but it is not an absolute barrier. Now, the EU allows EU companies to trade with foreign countries, and what it requires is that a foreign company must adopt approved contractual terms, and when it does so, then the export of data by EU companies to that foreign company is permitted. So, the Information Commissioner publishes advice for no-deal preparations, and what they recommend is that UK companies doing business in or with the European Economic Area adopt standard contractual terms to enable GDPR compliance by their EEA customers, which will allow them to continue doing business with the UK. The Information Commissioner publishes sample standard contractual terms for companies to use, which it has cleared with the European Union, with the European Commission. There are variants on these standard contractual terms to cover various different types of data and different purposes for it to be used. The Information Commissioner's Office actually offers a wizard that you can use, a sort of Windows-type wizard, to assemble the various different clauses together. So basically, you get a few boxes like this, and you just tick the ones that apply. So, does the data? So this is one about who's the personal data about? Is it about the staff? Is it about your customers? Is it about suppliers, etc.? You tick all the ones that apply, and out pops a set of standard contractual terms from the Information Commissioner that have been cleared with the European Commission that apply to the circumstances that you've selected. But it all ends up as being just straight boilerplate. And while I'm not going to walk through the details of that boilerplate now, although it's published at a link that I'm showing you, essentially the broad summary of it is that you are contracting commitments to apply what you would be required to do under GDPR anyway. And since the UK is implementing that LINX would not really be extending its commitments because we would be having to do that under UK law anyway. But by doing this, we would have a European Commission approved way of going about it, so there would be no question of a EU-based company having to say, oh, I'm not allowed to send you our contact details because of GDPR. So, our proposal is that in the event that by the time of LINX108, i.e. the next LINX meeting, a no-deal Brexit has occurred or seems likely, or if the issue remains unresolved, then at LINX108, we will propose incorporating the Information Commissioner's Office's recommended standard contractual terms into the MOU. If a Brexit deal that renders this moot has been finally concluded before LINX108, or if Article 50 is revoked and Brexit is dropped altogether, we will drop this proposal. So how we'll go about that? To keep it simple and to make sure it's effective and that we're not messing around with the standard terms that have been agreed between the ICO and the EU, what we propose to do is simply cut and paste the ICO's standard contractual clauses into a schedule to the MOU, and then we would add a very simple clause into the main body saying something along the lines of, if you are established in the European Economic Area, the provisions of the schedule exports of personal data from the European Economic Area shall apply. So I have at this URL published the clauses that the Information Commissioner has published as applied to the way that we filled out the wizard. The wizard requires the company to select all applicable data subjects, i.e. who the data is about, the data types, that is what the data is held about the subject, and the purposes, i.e. what the data can be used for. In order to avoid the possibility that we might need to come back with detailed MOU changes, with repeated MOU changes, I've taken the approach of selecting all the options where either there is an arguable case that we use that data already or for that purpose, even if the meaning of the definitions is ambiguous, we've erred on the side of caution. And also, if there is a reasonably foreseeable potential future need on the grounds that future projects should not be inhibited by, oh, well, we'd have to go back and change the MOU on the GDPR compliance thing before we could introduce this project. You don't want us to be coming back with that sort of stuff. The project should be approved on the basis of whether the project is sensible, not on the basis of needing to get an MOU change on GDPR. So essentially what that means is that I've probably clicked more of those options on the data subjects, data types and purposes than might strictly be necessary on the grounds of erring on the side of caution. Remember, the actual definitions of these things are ambiguous and open to legal argument anyway, and as to how it might apply. So essentially we've followed the idea that a cautious approach and click everything where it might be needed. So, consultation. Wherever possible, LINX seeks to announce proposed MOU changes at the LINX meeting prior to the meeting where they will be adopted, allowing 3 months for member consultation, and this is no exception. So we're announcing this now, and therefore we are now open to consultation, particularly on the following points. Firstly, do you support this general approach? And secondly, do you have any comments on the selection of data subjects, data types and purposes for which data have been used, having had the explanation of why we've been quite liberal in the selection that we've chosen. The consultation, the documents, the clauses are available from that URL. We do not believe that a no-deal Brexit need inhibit the transfer of this data, and actually, at the moment, it doesn't look like a no-deal Brexit is going to happen, but that's a political thing, so I'll leave that aside for now. We are just taking a cautious approach to ensure that we are properly prepared by applying the Information Commissioner's official guidance at LINX. And this recommendation comes from the board as a whole, which includes both people who are sympathetic and unsympathetic to the concept of Brexit, for what that's worth. This is a purely commercial, pragmatic decision to make sure we're prepared. Thank you. Any questions, anyone? James Blessing.
James Blessy, just it's a really minor question. If we go ahead and approve it at 108, and then it becomes moot anyway, and we don't need it, are we then going to take it all out again, or just leave it there?
Honestly, it wouldn't really matter. Yeah, we would consider that a tidying exercise that we wouldn't do at any particular time, but just when convenient. Right, our greatest data protection specialist in the room. I'm nervous now.
Okay, I was going to say no-brainer.
Thank you. Excellent. That's what we like to hear. No other questions? Okay. Well, if anybody has any comments in the meantime, we have 3 months for this consultation. Otherwise, that is how we would plan to come back. One more question from our colleagues in Ireland.
Hi, Nick Hilliard from LINX. There's a question about whether standard contractual clauses are actually going to be compatible with the GDPR, and I believe that there's a case going through the CJA EU at the moment. Do you have any comment on this?
I don't have any comment on this other than that the only thing that is sensible for LINX to do in the circumstances is to apply the advice available from the Information Commissioner as negotiated with the European Commission. But maybe Andrew has some comments on that.
Yes, Max Schrems versus the Irish Data Protection Commissioner, I think, right. Or is it Facebook? Yeah, if that case finds that standard clauses are invalid, and it is entirely possible that it will, then basically the situation for all exports out of Europe will be so catastrophically affected that they're going to have to rush through some solution. Because everything has been built on standard clauses since the safe harbour decision, which was also brought by Max Schrems against Facebook.
I mean, if you allow me a personal comment on this, I'm actually with Neil on that side of things. The EU just simply cannot be in a position where EU companies are not capable of doing business with foreign companies. And if it puts itself in that position, it will have to correct it somehow.
Yeah, I mean, the CJEU has shown an unwillingness to consider consequences of its decisions. Which
then other parts of the European legislative process would have to make up that gap.
Precisely. Which is how the original Schrems decision created the possibility of Schrems 2. It was entirely foreseeable. But, yeah, they will have to come up with some solution, not just for LINX, not just for universities, but for if they want Europe to have a data business at all.
This is the whole economy here. There is nothing special about LINX in this or even the telecom sector. Okay, thank you, everyone.